Welcome to the Facts Over Fandom show. I am your host, Brandon Podgorski, professor of sport leadership and management. And here at the Facts Over Fandom show, I like to break down sports leadership in 10 minutes or less, as I've talked about on previous episodes. Now, this is the relaunch of the Facts Over Fandom show. When I did this back in 2023, it was more about sports business and teaching on the business side of sport. But I've shifted my focus a little bit just with some career changes and other things that I'm interested in where I want to talk about sport leadership. And I want to try to do this in 10 minutes or less, just to give you a short kind of snapshot into what can we learn about what's happening in sport. And so today, what I want to talk about is USA Soccer. And so people are up in arms. So today is Wednesday, June 11th, 2025. And some people are up in arms about USA Soccer right now, specifically our men's national team. And this is what we're going to talk about in today's show, about our men's national team specifically. Last night, if you're a soccer fan or sports fan, maybe you might have noticed that the United States played Switzerland in soccer. And reading from ESPN.com, the United States gave up 4 goals in the first half and looked unprepared for next year's World Cup, getting routed by Switzerland 4-0 in a friendly on Tuesday night in Nashville, Tennessee, as the Americans lost their 4th straight game for the first time since 2007. And you see kind of 2 factions of people. One are soccer fans, specifically diehard kind of U.S. men's national team soccer fans who are upset because their favorite team got beat. They can't understand what's happening. How could we get beat by Switzerland 4-0? I would say, hey, this is a friendly and it's a tune-up and you're kind of getting ready for next year. You still got plenty of time before the World Cup, but it sends up red flags. And then you have another faction of people who are taking a lot of pleasure in it. Just because, I think it's kind of, for some people, fun to kind of pile on when people aren't successful, especially with the resources that we've invested in U.S. soccer over the past few decades. And the fact that we're the most powerful nation on earth. We produce some of the best athletes in the world. Why do we keep getting beat in soccer? What could be behind it? So, took a little bit of a deep dive this morning and just wanted to pull about 5 different leadership lessons out of U.S. soccer and how can we apply these maybe a little bit more broadly, or what can we do to kind of help the average fans viewing of soccer in their perspective of soccer here in the United States. So kind of the central question that we're going to look at in this episode, why is the U.S. still behind in men's soccer despite millions of youth participants and increased investment? Because if you drive by any soccer field, almost any weekend, it's full of little kids playing soccer. It's just kind of a natural thing for parents to put their kids in. So why are we still behind? So first thing I want to talk about is the paradox of participation. So soccer, it's the second most popular youth sport in America, I believe behind basketball. We spend tens of millions annually on youth development. Yet when we look at the United States men's national team, they've only had one modern era World Cup quarterfinal appearance, and that was in 2002. And they still rank behind. I think currently they're ranked 16th in the FIFA rankings. So, while compared to the rest of the world, that might sound good, compared to the advantages that we have here in the United States with participation and funding, it's pretty low. And so something to take out of this paradox of participation is that participation is not performance. When we think about effective leadership turns engagement into progress through vision and intentional systems. And I do believe the U.S. has a vision and intentional system in soccer. The question is it effective? There's been a lot of changes made over the past few decades in soccer with how we're going to train, how we're going to progress kids, and how we're going to coach our coaches with coaching pedagogy. Is it working as compared to other countries? Just because we're getting kids involved doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting any better. My son did soccer this past year as a 5-year-old, and he improved as the season went on, but it's got to be deliberate. If you've ever read, I believe it's the book Talent is Overrated, right? Deliberate practice. So we're going to get into that a little bit more. Number two, the systems and structures. As we think about the best teams in the world in Europe versus the United States. So the club system in Europe, quite a bit different from what we do here in the United States. In the United States, you have your rec leagues and then you go into your school leagues, right? Europe has more centralized systems. They have academies. So the US system is very fragmented and it's largely pay to play, right? But getting kids started early, it's not just about elite competition early. All right, because if we're going to get kids started and you say you're only going to play soccer and we're going to make it highly competitive early, what we've seen in youth sports, and this will be a different episode later, it increases the rate of burnout, overuse injuries, and dropout. Right? So when we look at countries like Germany and France, they actually promote late specialization and multi-sport development, but within structured age-appropriate systems. So these kids get into these club systems early, and they have a way of developing them according to child development processes. So that means we're not going to start competition really early, and we're going to encourage multi-sport participation, but maybe we're not going to compete all year long. There's going to be, especially young, we're going to have a focus on practice, on skill development, on fundamentals, and not necessarily play. And we get that wrong here in the United States. I think with a lot of our sports, but specifically soccer, all right, we'll have a little practice and then you're just going to go play, right? Well, with kids, it really needs to be about developing agility, balance, coordination, speed at an early age, from maybe all the way up to 8. And then, learning the fundamentals and then starting to train and then starting to train to play, right? What we like to do is put kids in competition really early instead of actually developing what they need to be good athletes. So the leadership lesson out of this is that smart systems, they balance access, enjoyment, and readiness. Great leaders, they build environments that nurture passion while preparing for excellence over time. Think about you in your job. You didn't just step in and all of a sudden, we're going to put you in the CEO role, or we're going to expect you to be a master at this job when you first step in. We got to train you, right? We need to develop you to get you to the place where you need to be and able to perform at the highest level. Right. And hopefully you've never been in a position where you've just been thrown in and people kind of just throw up their hands like, good luck, figure it out. Right. Because you're set up to fail that way. Right. And a lot of times I think that's what we do to our kids in sport. Number 3, cultural misalignment. I think this is a big one. Soccer here in the United States, it really lacks deep cultural prestige of sports like football, basketball, and baseball. It's not our national sport. Right. Everywhere else in the world, soccer is the most popular sport. Right? United States, maybe it's 4th behind basketball, baseball, football, but then you also have to compete with volleyball and other places you got to compete with lacrosse. So, growing up, I played basketball and baseball and football in my yards with my friends, right? That's what we did. You don't see a lot of kids growing up playing soccer in yards. But yet, when I travel down to Mexico, you see soccer fields on concrete. That's just what they do, right? And so in the US, soccer often gets caught up between like recreational play and chaotic attempts at elite development, right? Without clear, consistent goals. And so the top US athletes in our country, they still choose other sports due to clear scholarship and professional paths as well, right? And so the leadership lesson from this is that culture shapes outcomes. So effective leaders, we have to align our values, our incentives, our development pathways to support a shared vision of success. Right? And then number 4, coaching and talent development. U.S. youth coaches, they often lack formal training and national certification standards. So other countries like Germany, they've invested heavily in coaching education to rebuild their national pipeline. Now it's happening here in the United States. I actually think USA Soccer does a nice job of having a soccer training program, but it's not mandatory. Coaches don't have to get into it if they want to coach youth athletes. Where I got my first master's in recreation and sports science, Ohio University. They're doing amazing work in preparing soccer coaches, but we're still behind compared to the rest of the world, right? And so our coaching quality, it's just inconsistent across regions and leagues, right? And you have all these regions and leagues that are competing against each other instead of working together right? Just in my little suburb here of Indianapolis, I could go almost 10 or 15 miles either way, and my kid can play in different soccer leagues, right? There's just not a kind of cohesiveness to get everybody together. Like, this is what we need to do to develop really good soccer players, right? So the leadership lesson here is to invest in your developers. Your system is only as strong as those who guide your people, right? So there's this thought that, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Right? And so what is your culture? What's your system? Right? How can we effectively develop our employees, our athletes to be ready for higher competition, right? Or to be ready for higher work. And then number 5, just some bright spots, not to end on a downer, in the road ahead. We are seeing, I think Major League Soccer, MLS, is starting to do a nice job with their academies. FC Dallas, Philadelphia Union, they're starting to produce real talent, kind of starting to emulate that European model. And we're starting to see some U.S. players starting to play well overseas, specifically in Europe. Pulisic is one of the guys that comes to my mind. I'm sorry, I'm not a huge soccer fan, but I am familiar with him, right? And so it's going to be interesting. Next year, we host the World Cup here in the United States, right? This could be a big turning point for U.S. soccer, right? And so we'll see what happens. If some of these structural issues are addressed, will we start to make a step forward, right? So think about this. Leadership, it's not a long game thinking. Improvement takes time, vision, the courage to redesign systems that work for the future, not just for today. And I think this is a hard thing for fans of U.S. soccer. We want to be good now. We want to be good right away. This is so frustrating losing to these other teams. And listen, I understand. I can sympathize with that. Even though, again, I'm not a big soccer fan. If USA wins, great, woohoo. If they lose, all right, fine. I don't really care all that much. But I do care about development, about athlete development, about kids development. And I think we're at a point in time with USA Soccer where we've put resources into place. It's just going to take a long time to kind of get to the point where we're one of the top 10 teams in the world, because it's a process. I think we got the right vision, we got the right strategy, right? But it's a process. And I think more, frankly, needs to be done, as far as I'm concerned, getting these grassroots youth teams together and these programs together. Let's be structured in our training. Let's all work together instead of competing as different leagues for the same goal. Doesn't mean you can't have different leagues, but what are we doing as far as like coaching and developing these kids? What can we do together to reach the same goal? What can we do to make soccer accessible? Because that's another problem that we really kind of struggle with, is that if you want to be on some of these elite youth development teams, or even some of these recreational teams, you got to pay to play. Well, not everybody can pay to play, especially if you're competing against basketball, baseball, football in this country. And then you want to charge parents, hundreds to thousands of dollars to play on these teams. Well, you're only going to get a small number of kids. Right? So if you want to build up soccer from that grassroots level to the point where it's part of our culture, that it needs to be accessible to more people. I mean, you could go anywhere. I live here in Indiana. I mean, literally, you can go to about any block, and I'm going to find a basketball hoop. All I need is a ball, and I can just go play, get some friends, and go play. Right? We can do the same with soccer. All you need is a ball and a field. Kids will figure out goals and everything else. Right? But we've made this sport to the point where, well, if you want to participate, you need to pay and be in this league. Right? We probably need to change our thinking on that. And what can we do to get kids involved just recreationally? Just go and play. Right? So my final takeaways: USA Soccer struggle. It's not about passion or money. It's about a misalignment between opportunity, access, and vision. So leaders in all sport, we have to ask, are we engineering systems for sustainable development or chasing short-term wins? It's something I see every weekend when I take my son to go play baseball. He plays at a huge facility here on the north side of Indianapolis. If you're from this area, you know what I mean. And I'm just seeing, again, I want to say this for a future episode, and I know I'm over my 10 minutes, but I'm just seeing such a emphasis on competition, on only certain players playing, on playing way too many games in a weekend, not enough emphasis on actual sustainable development. on practice, on training. And I think that's why we're going to start to lag behind other countries. And we're starting to see it, and we have seen it in basketball over the past couple of decades as well. Right? So sport leadership, it requires balancing play with purpose with development and well-being. And maybe that's what I'll talk about next week and start to put these thoughts together a little bit better on how we can actually develop our kids in a sustainable way and develop our athletes for the most success. So that's going to do it for this episode. I know I went over my 10 minutes, but hopefully give you an idea of where we're at here in this country with USA Soccer, where I think we're going, the potential for success, what we still need to do in order to be one of the best countries in the world in U.S. soccer. So until next week, love God, love each other, be a good sport. We'll see you next time.